The jungle stretched endlessly beneath the scout ship as Tom brought it down for landing. His scanners had picked up strange energy readings from this sector of planet LC 2047, and after 3 months of boring survey work, anything unusual was worth checking out. The landing zone was a small clearing where massive trees had been cleared long ago, their stumps now covered in luminescent moss. As Tom stepped out of his ship in his environmental suit, the humidity hit him like a wall, even through his suit's cooling system. The air was thick with the scent of alien flowers and decaying vegetation. Base, this is Scout Thompson. Landing successful at coordinates 47 to 8923. Beginning preliminary survey, he reported, knowing the message would take hours to reach human space. Protocol demanded he report everything, even if no one would read it for days. His handheld scanner led him through the dense undergrowth. Strange birds with 6 wings called out above him, and small creatures scattered at his approach. After 20 minutes of careful walking, he found what had triggered his ship's sensors. Hidden beneath vines and roots stood a massive structure. Its walls were made of some kind of white material that had resisted the jungle's attempts to consume it. Tom's heart beat faster. This was clearly artificial, and definitely not human in origin. He approached the building carefully, following his training. The entrance was a large oval door, partially open. Tom switched on his suit's lights and stepped inside. The air was stale but breathable according to his readings. Warning: life support systems at 12% capacity, announced a soft voice in an unknown language. Tom's translator took a moment before converting it to English. He moved deeper into the facility, his boots echoing on the metal floor. The walls were lined with what looked like empty plant cultivation tanks. Most were cracked or damaged, but a few still glowed with dim blue light. A sound made him freeze. It came from deeper within the facility, something between a whisper and a rustle of leaves. "Hello," he called out, immediately regretting breaking protocol. First contact situations required careful handling, not shouting into dark corridors. The rustling grew louder. Tom's hand moved to his stunner, but he didn't draw it. The sound came from multiple directions now. They emerged from the shadows, humanoid figures with skin that seemed to shift between green and purple in his light. Their hair looked like fine leaves, moving gently despite the still air. They were all female, or at least appeared so to his human eyes. Their faces were almost human, but their eyes were large and entirely purple, with no visible pupils. 5 of them stood before him, wearing what looked like grown clothing, garments that seemed to be living plants shaped into dresses and robes. They moved with incredible grace, but also obvious caution. One stepped forward. She was taller than the others, with darker leaf hair that reached her waist. When she spoke, it was in the same language as the computer announcement. "Visitors, after so long." His translator struggled but managed to convert her words. "Have the makers returned for us?" Tom slowly raised his hands to show he was peaceful. "I'm not. I don't know who the makers are. I'm human, from Earth. I found your facility by accident." The tall one's expression showed confusion, then something like sadness. "The makers have forgotten us then. We are the bloom. They created us to tend their gardens, to be their perfect servants. But they left. The systems fail. We try to survive. But—" She gestured at the failing equipment around them. Even as she did, another warning echoed through the facility. "Life support 11.9% capacity." Tom looked at these beings, the bloom, and saw the fear in their strange eyes. They were clearly intelligent, clearly suffering. His mind raced through regulations about first contact, about non-interference, about reporting everything to his superiors. Then he looked at the dying facility around him, at these people who had been abandoned here. Sometimes, he decided, rules had to bend. "I might be able to help," he said slowly. "At least with the life support systems. Will you show me what's wrong?" The look of hope on their faces made him sure he'd made the right choice, no matter what his superiors might say later. Over the next few days, Tom spent every moment he could spare at the Bloom facility. He reported finding interesting ruins to base, but carefully omitted mentioning the inhabitants. His conscience battled with his duty, but every time he saw the failing system's warnings, he knew he couldn't just leave them. The tall Bloom who had first spoken to him was called Root. She showed him around their home, explaining how they had survived since the makers vanished 50 years ago. The facility's greenhouse systems had kept them alive, but now those systems were failing one by one. The nutrients we need, Root explained, gesturing to empty tanks. We can make food from sunlight like plants, but we need special minerals too. The makers designed us this way. Her purple eyes looked at the ground. To keep us dependent. Tom examined their storage systems. Most of the mineral solutions they needed were similar to basic hydroponic nutrients. His ship carried a good supply for emergency food production. It wouldn't be missed if some disappeared. I can help, he said, but we have to be careful. My people have strict rules about interfering with other species. Root touched a nearby wall, and tiny flowers bloomed under her fingers. Why would helping us be wrong? Tom sighed. Politics. Laws. Complicated things that sometimes get in the way of doing what's right. That night, he made his first supply run. His ship's cargo lift whirred as it brought up crates of nutrient solution. The other Bloom watched from the shadows as he worked, their leaf hair glowing softly in the darkness. One of them, a younger Bloom called Petal, helped him connect the new supplies to their systems. Her hands were quick and clever, showing him that the Bloom weren't just surviving. They had learned to maintain their home's complex technology. The makers taught us everything, Petal said as they worked. But they taught us only what they wanted us to know. She pointed to locked sections of their computer systems. Many things are hidden from us. Tom studied the alien computer systems whenever he could. The language was complex, but his translator helped him understand the basics. He discovered that the makers had been a species obsessed with creating perfect servants for their vast gardens and farms. The Bloom were just one of many experiments. But what happened to the makers? Why did they abandon their creations? The answers were probably in those locked files. Days turned into weeks. Tom made excuses to stay in the area, claiming to study local minerals. He brought more supplies, taught the Bloom about human technology, and learned from them in return. They showed him how they could communicate with plants, how they could speed up or slow down growth with a touch. One evening, as he was preparing to return to his ship, Root stopped him. "The others worry," she said. "What happens when you must leave?" The question had been haunting Tom too. His survey mission wouldn't last forever. Eventually, he would be assigned elsewhere. "I'm working on something," he told her. "There might be a way to get help from my people, but it's risky, both for me and for you." Root's purple eyes studied him carefully. "The makers made us to serve, but they didn't make us stupid. We know helping us could hurt you. Why do you do it?" Tom thought about all the regulations he was breaking, about how his career would be ruined if he was discovered. Then he thought about leaving these people to die slowly as their systems failed. "Because it's right," he said simply. "And sometimes that's the only reason you need." Root smiled, and flowers bloomed in her leaf hair. "The makers created us to be perfect servants," she said. "But perhaps they should have created themselves to be more like humans." As Tom walked back to his ship that night, he began forming a plan. It would mean breaking even more rules, but he had already crossed that line. Now he just had to find a way to save the Bloom without destroying himself in the process. The message from Central Command flashed on Tom's ship screen. "XP Lane XTNDDD stay in HEC2 or LC 2047. His heart raced as he read it. They were getting suspicious. He composed a careful reply about studying unique mineral formations, attaching fake data he'd spent hours creating. As he sent it, another warning light flashed. His ship's nutrient supplies were running low. He'd given too much to the Bloom too quickly. Inside the facility, Root and Petal were making progress with the maker's computer system. Tom had helped them bypass some security protocols, and now they were discovering more about their own history. "Look at this," Petal called out, her purple eyes wide as she pointed to a screen. There were more facilities, many more. The Makers built us everywhere. Tom leaned in to study the data. The Makers had created bloom facilities on dozens of worlds, all abandoned now. The reason for the abandonment was still locked behind higher security protocols. "Can we access the main database?" he asked. Root touched the console, and tiny vines grew from her fingers, connecting with the system. It was a skill Tom found fascinating. The bloom could interface directly with the Maker's biotechnology. "There's something," she said slowly. "A final message from the Makers. But it's heavily encrypted." They worked through the afternoon, trying to crack the encryption. Tom's translator struggled with the complex alien code, but piece by piece, they made progress. Suddenly, the screen filled with text. Root's leaf hair wilted as she read it. "No," she whispered. "No, it can't be." The message revealed the truth. The Makers had abandoned their creations because they were dying. A plague had swept through their civilization, targeting their specific biology. They had fled to their homeworld, sealing themselves away in hope of finding a cure. But there was more. The bloom weren't just gardeners. They were meant to be replacements. The Makers had engineered them to be resistant to the plague, planning to transfer their consciousness into bloom bodies when the technology was perfected. "We were meant to be empty vessels," Root said quietly. "Not people, just empty bodies for them to steal." Tom put a hand on her shoulder, watching flowers bloom and wilt rapidly in her hair as she processed the information. "But they failed," he said. "You grew into your own people instead." Before Root could respond, an alarm blared from Tom's communicator. "Incoming ship detected," the computer announced. "Survey Command vessel approaching." His blood ran cold. Survey Command never made random visits. Someone had discovered something. "They can't find you," he said quickly. "If they do, you'll become research subjects. Property. We need to hide you." The bloom moved fast, shutting down systems and retreating to the deeper parts of the facility. Tom ran to his ship and took off, hoping to intercept the command vessel before they could scan the area thoroughly. The command ship was larger than his scout vessel, hanging in orbit like a steel predator. His communication screen lit up. "Scout Thompson," a stern voice said, "your supply usage and behavior have been flagged as suspicious. We are conducting an inspection." Tom kept his voice steady. "Of course, Commander. Though I should warn you, the ruins I'm studying contain some unusual radiation. Might interfere with your scans." He had already taught the bloom how to create false radiation signatures using their power systems. It was another broken regulation to add to his growing list. The commander's voice was suspicious. "We'll risk it. Prepare for inspection in 6 hours." As the communication ended, Tom slumped in his chair. 6 hours to hide all evidence of his help, to conceal the bloom, and to fool the inspection team. He looked down at the facility hidden in the jungle below. He had tried to help, but now he might have brought an even worse fate to his friends. The price of kindness was proving higher than he'd expected. But as he flew back down to warn the bloom, he knew he'd pay any price to keep them safe. Some things were worth any cost. The inspection team found nothing. Tom and the bloom had hidden their tracks well, with Root using her biotechnology skills to mask all signs of life. But their success was short-lived. 3 days after the inspection, Tom's sensors picked up 3 unmarked ships entering the atmosphere. They weren't military or survey vessels. Their design was sleek, predatory, and unmistakably belonged to corporate mercenaries. "Someone talked," Tom muttered, rushing to the facility. Someone on that inspection team sold the information. He found the bloom already in motion. They had developed their own warning systems, sensing the vibrations of the approaching ships through the planet's plant life. "They're landing in 3 different locations," Root said, her purple eyes glowing with worry. "They're trying to surround us." Tom checked his stunner. It seemed pathetically small against what was coming. "You need to run. Hide deeper in the jungle." Petal touched the facility walls, connecting to its systems. "No," she said firmly. "The Makers abandoned us. We won't abandon our home." The other bloom nodded in agreement, their leaf hair swaying with determination. Root stepped forward, flowers blooming aggressively in her hair. "We can fight. The Makers gave us abilities they didn't understand. Watch." She pressed her hands to the ground. The jungle around the facility came alive. Vines grew at impossible speeds, trees shifted their positions, and the very earth seemed to pulse with energy. "The mercenaries will expect helpless experiments," Tom said, understanding their plan. "Not warriors who can control the jungle itself." They worked quickly. The bloom spread through the surrounding forest, each taking control of a section. Tom set up his ship's sensors to track the mercenaries' movements, feeding the information to Root. The first attack came at nightfall. A team of 6 mercenaries in powered armor approached from the east, carrying nets and stun weapons. They wanted the bloom alive. Living specimens were worth more. Root waited until they were deep in her territory. Then she struck. Vines thick as a human arm erupted from the ground, wrapping around the mercenaries' legs. Trees groaned and shifted, their branches reaching down like giant hands. The mercenaries fought back, cutting through vines with plasma blades, but for every vine they severed, 10 more appeared. The jungle itself was their enemy, and they had no defense against it. On the western approach, Petal had created a maze of moving vegetation. The second team of mercenaries became hopelessly lost, their navigation equipment useless as the paths constantly shifted around them. The third team made it closest to the facility. They approached from the south, using sonic pulses to clear a path through the vegetation. But Tom was waiting. His stunner might have been small, but he knew exactly where to hit their armor's weak points. The battle raged through the night. The mercenaries had technology and weapons, but the bloom had turned the entire jungle into their weapon. By dawn, the attackers were in full retreat, leaving behind broken equipment and tales of a forest that fought back. As the sun rose, Tom and Root watched the mercenary ships flee into orbit. "They'll be back," Tom said grimly, "with bigger teams and better equipment. Corporate hunters don't give up when there's profit involved." Root's purple eyes were fierce. "Let them come. We are not the helpless experiments the Makers left behind. We are our own people now, and we will fight for our home." Tom looked at the battle-scarred jungle around them. The bloom had shown him their true strength tonight. They weren't just survivors. They were warriors who could bend nature itself to their will. But he also knew that strength alone wouldn't be enough. The corporations would keep coming, with larger forces and deadlier weapons. The bloom needed more than just the ability to fight. They needed legal protection, official recognition of their rights. Looking at Root's determined face, Tom made his decision. It was time to stop hiding, time to show humanity what the bloom really were. The next battle wouldn't be fought with vines and stunners, but with information and truth. He just hoped the galaxy was ready for what he was about to reveal. Tom sat in his ship's cabin, recording what would either save the bloom or end his career. He had gathered all the evidence, genetic scans proving the bloom's intelligence, recordings of their society, and data about the Makers' abandonment. "This is Scout Thomas Thompson," he began, looking directly into the camera. "What I'm about to show you will change how we see alien life forever." He worked through the night, carefully editing the footage. The bloom helped, with Root and Petal adding their own messages. They spoke of their hopes, their fears, and their right to exist as free beings. "Send it," Root said, watching the final version. "Let your people see us as we truly are." Tom's finger hovered over the broadcast button. Once he sent this, there would be no going back. Taking a deep breath, he pressed it. The message shot into space, aimed at every major news network in human space. The response was faster than anyone expected. Within hours, the first news ships appeared in orbit. Then came the scientists, the diplomats, and the curious. Tom's message had started a firestorm of debate across human space. Some called for immediate recognition of the bloom as sentient beings. Others warned of the dangers of unknown alien life. The corporations that had sent mercenaries now sent lawyers instead, trying to claim discovery rights. But they had underestimated the bloom again. Root stepped forward as their spokesperson, addressing the human visitors with grace and wisdom that surprised everyone. "We do not ask for charity," she told the assembled reporters, her leaf hair glowing in the sunlight. "We ask for the chance to prove ourselves as equals in this galaxy." The bloom demonstrated their abilities openly now. They showed how they could heal sick plants, grow food in barren soil, and communicate with entire ecosystems. Many humans were amazed to learn that the bloom could feel the health of a planet through its plant life. "Imagine," one scientist said excitedly in a broadcast, "what we could learn from them about environmental restoration. They could help us save dying worlds." Public opinion began to shift. The images of the bloom tending their jungle home, their obvious intelligence and peaceful nature, touched something in human hearts. People saw not monsters or property, but a new form of life worthy of respect. Tom found himself at the center of it all, explaining again and again why he had chosen to help them. Sometimes, he told an interviewer, doing the right thing means breaking the rules. The bloom didn't ask to be created, but they have as much right to live as any of us. The corporate lawyers fought hard, claiming the bloom were artificial life forms and therefore property. But they hadn't counted on human empathy. When Root spoke about the Maker's abandonment, about their struggle to survive, millions of humans rallied to their cause. 60 days after Tom's broadcast, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The decision was unanimous. The bloom would be recognized as a sentient species with full rights. As the announcement was read, Tom stood with Root in the facility's main hall. Tears ran down his face as he watched the blooms celebrate, their leaf hair glowing with joy, flowers blooming spontaneously around them. "You risked everything for us," Root said quietly. "Why?" Tom smiled, watching Petal teach a group of human scientists about plant communication. "Because you showed me that life, in any form, deserves a chance to grow free." The facility, once a prison of sorts, was transforming into an embassy. Human scientists worked alongside the bloom, learning from each other. What had started as one human's choice to help had become a bridge between species. Root touched a wall, making a beautiful pattern of flowers bloom. "The Makers created us to serve," she said, "but you showed us we could be more. You showed us we could be free." Tom looked at the bloom, no longer hidden but standing proud in their home. Sometimes, he realized, the greatest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness. And sometimes, breaking the rules was the only way to make things right. The discovery of the second bloom facility shook the galaxy. A survey team found it on a distant moon, its inhabitants struggling just as Root's people had been. Then came the third facility, and the fourth. Each discovery brought more of the abandoned children of the Makers into the light. Tom coordinated the rescue efforts from the first facility, which had become known as Haven Prime. His small scout ship had been replaced by a proper rescue vessel, staffed by both humans and bloom. "Another signal," Root announced, her purple eyes scanning the data streams. "A small facility on the edges of the spiral arm. Life support at 20%. They rushed to each new location, never knowing if they would find survivors. Some facilities were empty, their inhabitants long gone. Others held small groups of bloom, surviving against incredible odds. The rescued bloom brought new knowledge with them. Each facility had been designed for different purposes, some for farming harsh worlds, others for tending water gardens or caring for floating forests. The Makers had created specialized groups for every environment. At Haven Prime, Root organized what they learned. "Each group has unique abilities," she explained to Tom as they studied the data. "Desert bloom can pull water from the air. Ocean bloom can filter toxins from water. Together, we're more than the Makers ever imagined." The bloom began to develop their own culture, blending their inherited knowledge with new ideas. They created art by growing living sculptures, wrote poetry about their experiences, and developed their own form of music using the natural sounds of plants. But not all humans welcomed these changes. Conservative groups worried about the spreading influence of the bloom. Corporate interests, still angry about losing control of the species, spread rumors about dangerous plant people infiltrating human space. Root faced these challenges with quiet dignity. "We cannot make everyone trust us," she told her people. "We can only show them, day by day, that we deserve that trust." Tom watched as the bloom proved themselves again and again. They helped restore damaged ecosystems on human colonies. They developed new ways to grow food in harsh environments. Their knowledge of plant life revolutionized medicine and agriculture. One day, as Tom walked through Haven Prime's expanded gardens, he found Petal teaching a group of young bloom who had been rescued from a facility in the outer systems. "The humans gave us something the makers never did," she was saying, making flowers bloom in patterns as she spoke. "They gave us choice. We can choose who we want to be, what we want to create." The young bloom watched in wonder as she demonstrated how to communicate with different types of plants. Their leaf hair glowed with excitement as they learned to use their abilities in new ways. Later, Tom found Root in the communication center, coordinating with other facilities. The screens showed bloom communities flourishing across the galaxy, each developing their own unique characteristics while staying connected to their people. "We're not just surviving anymore," Root said, noticing him. "We're growing, changing, becoming something new." She touched a nearby plant, and it burst into bloom. "The makers wanted us to be tools. Humans showed us we could be people." Tom looked at the screens showing the various bloom communities. Desert bloom, with their silvery leaf hair adapted to harsh sun. Ocean bloom, with their blue-tinted skin. Mountain bloom, who could grow plants in the thinnest air. Each group was different, but all were part of the same growing family. "You did this yourselves," he said. "We just gave you the chance." Root smiled, making patterns of light dance through her leaf hair. "Sometimes a chance is all anyone needs. The seeds of change were always within us. We just needed the right conditions to grow." As night fell over Haven Prime, Tom watched the bloom tend their gardens under the stars. What had started as a rescue mission had become something much more, the birth of a new civilization, growing stronger and more beautiful with each passing day. The makers had created the bloom to serve, but in finding their freedom, they had discovered their true purpose: to help life flourish wherever they went. 5 years after Tom first discovered the abandoned facility, Haven Prime had transformed beyond recognition. The once failing structure now stood at the center of a vast living city, where buildings grew from the ground and streets were lined with luminescent flowers that lit the night. Tom walked through the central garden with Root, who now served as the leader of the Bloom Council. Representatives from all the discovered facilities gathered here to guide their people's future. "The last human survey team left today," Root said, making a flower bloom in her palm. "They've officially declared our world a sovereign planet. We're truly free now." The planet, once known only as LC 2047, had been renamed Eden by the bloom. Under their care, the entire world had become a showcase of what plant and animal life could achieve when guided by the bloom's abilities. In the distance, a group of human scientists worked alongside mountain bloom specialists, studying how to grow food in high-altitude environments. Their research had already helped feed millions on struggling colony worlds. "Remember when you found us?" Root asked, her purple eyes twinkling. "We were so afraid, hiding in the dark." Tom nodded, watching as a flock of 6-winged birds soared overhead. The animals of Eden had flourished under bloom care, evolving into even more extraordinary forms. "You've come so far since then." They reached the new council chamber, a living structure that had been grown rather than built. Inside, bloom from every facility were gathering for a historic moment. Today, they would sign their first major treaty with the human government. Petal, now a respected scientist, was presenting the final proposal. "We offer our knowledge freely," she said to the assembled delegates. In return, we ask only that it be used to heal, not harm, to grow, not destroy. The treaty would allow the bloom to serve as environmental advisors to human colonies, helping restore damaged worlds while maintaining their independence. It was everything Tom had hoped for when he first chose to help them. A small bloom child ran past, her leaf hair glowing with excitement. She stopped to touch a wilting plant, and Tom watched in amazement as it straightened and bloomed. The new generation of bloom was stronger, more confident, born into freedom rather than servitude. The makers would never recognize us now, Root said softly. We've become so much more than they planned. The ceremony began as Eden's 3 suns set, filling the council chamber with golden light. As Root signed the treaty, flowers bloomed throughout the chamber, a spontaneous celebration of life and growth. Tom found himself remembering that first dark facility, the failing life support, the frightened beings hiding in shadows. Now those same beings were teaching humanity how to better care for their worlds, how to work with nature instead of against it. After the ceremony, Root led Tom to a special garden where the bloom honored their history. At its center stood a simple scout ship, his original vessel, preserved as a reminder of how everything changed. The council has made a decision, Root said, touching a nearby tree that immediately produced fresh fruit. We're naming our first space vessel after you. The Thomas Thompson will carry bloom ambassadors to other worlds. Tom felt tears in his eyes. I just did what was right. You did more than that, Root corrected him. You showed us that kindness can change worlds. That one person choosing to help can start something greater than themselves. As night fell, the garden lit up with bioluminescent flowers. Bloom children played among the trees, their leaf hair glowing in different colors as they learned to communicate with plants. Human visitors watched in wonder as the bloom demonstrated their abilities, teaching rather than hiding. Root touched the ground, and a circle of flowers bloomed around them. The galaxy forgot us, she said, but one human remembered, and that was enough. Tom looked at the thriving world around him, at the perfect blend of nature and civilization the bloom had created. They had taken their painful past and transformed it into something beautiful, something that could help all species grow toward a better future. As Eden's moons rose over the living city, Tom knew that some rules were meant to be broken, especially when breaking them could help life flourish in all its forms.